In this video, I'm going to be doing a tier list of every single pseudo-legendary Pokemon that has ever existed in the Pokemon franchise up until Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And I have to tell you, each one of these Pokemon are extremely powerful in a variety of different Pokemon games, and they are also incredibly iconic. A lot of players are very fond of these particular Pokemon, and some of them are even more powerful than legendaries, especially in games like Pokemon Go. I'm going to be going over all of this in today's video. So let's get right into it. Alright, let's jump right into it. So every single one of these Pokemon on the bottom here, they're actually all pseudo-legendaries with the exception of one of them, and I'll get more into that later. But yeah, every single one of these Pokemon are truly iconic and they're extremely powerful in a variety of different Pokemon games. So let's start off with the Kanto pseudo-legendary, and it is of course Dragonite. Now, nothing can be said about Dragonite that is going to be negative. This Pokemon is truly iconic when it comes to the Pokemon franchise. It is going to be an S tier when it comes to pseudo-legendaries, mainly because of how powerful it is, especially in games like Pokemon Go. And I also think when it comes to pseudo-legendaries, Dragonite is typically the one that comes to mind for a lot of different people who are familiar with the Pokemon franchise. So yeah, I would consider Dragonite as an S tier pseudo-legendary. Now, in terms of Pokemon Go, it is incredibly powerful as both a raid attacker as well as a PvP Pokemon. It's in a variety of different leagues in the meta, so a lot of people tend to think of Dragonite as one of the best non-legendary Pokemon in Pokemon Go, and it's somewhat similar in all the other Pokemon games as well. So yeah, naturally, Dragonite is going to be an S tier pseudo-legendary. Next up, let's talk about Tyranitar. Now, this one is going to be a B tier in my opinion. Yes, it is extremely powerful, especially within Pokemon Go, and I would actually consider it one of the most iconic when it comes to pseudo-legendaries, mainly because it was the second one that was ever released. But when it comes to its iconography compared to a lot of the other Pokemon that I'm going to be talking about, I would consider it somewhat in the B tier. It's not necessarily bad enough where it's going to be in the C or D tier, but it's definitely going to have enough fan recognition where it's going to be in the B tier. And yeah, I do think that's a fitting spot for this particular Pokemon. Next up, we got Salamence. Now, this one is also going to be a B tier. Now, if this was a Pokemon Go specific video, then I would actually consider it an S tier, mainly because Salamence is definitely considered one of the best non-legendary dragon Pokemon when it comes to Pokemon Go. But when it comes to the overall Pokemon franchise, I would consider it as part of the B tier, considering just, I think a lot of players are familiar with it, but not everyone is. So yeah, that's going to be another B tier Pokemon. But we also have another pseudo-legendary from the Sinnoh region, and that is of course Metagross. This one I'm going to put in the A tier. Now the reason for that is of course because when it comes to gameplay, it's something that you typically see in a lot of different Pokemon games, especially in Pokemon Go. It's the top steel type attacker when it comes to raids in Pokemon Go, and in the PvP meta you definitely see it a lot. Some would actually compare it to Dragonite and put it in the S tier, but for me, I'm going to put it in the A tier because, yeah, a lot of people know about Metagross, but not a lot of people are familiar with it as well. And it is definitely very powerful when it comes to gameplay with all the different Pokemon games. Next up, we got Garchomp. Now, this one's going to be an A tier for me, and this is more of a personal preference. This one is actually my favorite pseudo-legendary, and I think it has a lot of the same strengths and weaknesses as Metagross in my opinion. It's a top ground type attacker as well as a good dragon type attacker when it comes to Pokemon Go, and within the other Pokemon games, especially with Pokemon, I believe it's Diamond and Pearl, it was the one Pokemon that I used the most, and yeah, because of that, I have to put it in the A tier. And I do think that's pretty fitting, even if it's just my own opinion. Next up, we got Haxorus. Now, this is the Pokemon that I was talking about earlier. This one is actually not a pseudo-legendary. It really doesn't even belong on this tier list video, but in a lot of ways, it kind of counts as a pseudo-legendary. Why do I say that? Well, it is actually very powerful, like a pseudo-legendary in a lot of different Pokemon games, and a lot of players actually think it is a pseudo-legendary. So, I would say because of that, if we were to say it is a pseudo-legendary, I would put it in the C tier. But because it's technically not a pseudo-legendary, I'm actually not going to include it on this list, unfortunately. Yeah, it's really unfortunate because I really do like Haxorus. I think it's one of the most iconic Pokemon in the game that's not a legendary or a pseudo-legendary. And if it were to be a pseudo-legendary, I guess hypothetically, it would be in the C tier. But yeah, because it's not, we're going to exclude it. Let's move on to Hydreigon, which actually is a pseudo-legendary. This one is going to be in the C tier. Now, when it comes to Pokemon Go, it is a top dark type attacker, which actually makes it really good and very useful. But unfortunately, it's not necessarily well known. What's actually well known is its de-evolved form, which is of course Dino. That's a Pokemon that you see a lot of plushies for. A lot of people are very familiar with that one. But when it comes to Hydreigon, not a lot of people care for it. And yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. It is really good as a Pokemon Go Pokemon, but other than that, you won't really see it in other Pokemon games. C tier is where it's going to land. Next up, let's talk about Hisuian Goodra. Now, this one is going to fall in the D tier. Unfortunately, I do not necessarily know a lot about this Pokemon because I did not play Pokemon Arceus. I'm pretty sure it's going to be considered a top tier Pokemon in that game, but when it comes to everything else, I'm not familiar with it at all. Like, it's not currently in Pokemon Go. I do predict it will eventually be in Pokemon Go really soon. Maybe eventually I will be familiar with this Pokemon and I'll probably remake this video with it included and kind of see where it lands in this list. But as of right now, it's going to be a D tier. Now, another D tier, unfortunately, is going to be its non-Hisuian form. It's for a lot of the same reasons. A lot of people don't even know that this is a pseudo-legendary. It's actually really cool, in my opinion. It's probably my third favorite pseudo-legendary, and for a lot of reasons, it's very interesting and very unique. I mean, in terms of its design, it doesn't even look like a pseudo-legendary, but a lot of people do like this Pokemon. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily relevant enough where you're going to find it anywhere up here. It's basically kind of a forgettable, really weird pseudo-legendary. It's going to fall into the D tier. Next up, we got Kommo-o, which is the pseudo-legendary from Pokemon Sun and Moon. This one is going to be in the C tier. For a lot of the same reasons as Hydreigon, it is very powerful in a variety of different Pokemon games, but unfortunately, it is not as iconic as some of the ones up here. A lot of people are going to know what a Dragonite is. A lot of people are going to know what a Metagross is. But not a lot of people are going to know what Kommo-o is. And yeah, because of that, it's going to fall a little bit short. But I do think this Pokemon can gain a lot of relevance in the future, and I really hope it does, because it is a very cool looking Pokemon. Next up, we got Dragapult. This is, of course, the pseudo-legendary from the Galar region. This one is going to be a B tier, and I do think this Pokemon has a lot of potential to be truly iconic. The one thing about Dragapult is that when it eventually gets added into Pokemon Go, it's going to be one of the top Dragon-type or Ghost-type Pokemon in the game. Think of it as a beefed-up version of Giratina Origin Form. It's going to have a lot more attack, at least with the stats that are currently in the game files. It's going to have a lot more attack, and depending on what moves it ends up getting, it could actually be one of the top raid attackers in the game as well. Dragapult is definitely one of those Pokemon you do not want to ignore, and I really hope it ends up becoming a lot more iconic when it comes to the Pokemon franchise. And then finally, we got Baxcalibur. This is the pseudo-legendary from the most recent generation of Pokemon, and that is of course Scarlet and Violet. This one I'm also going to put in the B tier. It's really cool. Like, I really like the design of Baxcalibur. It kind of reminds me of like a Godzilla or one of those kaijus that you see in Japan. It has a really cool design, and it's actually really powerful and very unique. It's the only pseudo-legendary with an ice type, and I think that's very important because in a one-on-one matchup against other dragons, that's what's going to give it the advantage. And when it comes to Pokemon Go, it's going to be really powerful once it gets added. Actually, that's going to be really soon because there's going to be another Paldean event in the next couple of weeks that's going to feature this Pokemon's family line. So be on the lookout for that. This Pokemon could potentially make a splash in the Go Battle League, and it also could be a good raid attacker as well. So yeah, there you go. This was my tier list for all of the pseudo-legendaries. Now, if I were to specifically make this a Pokemon Go tier list, it would look incredibly different. Like, I would actually say that Metagross would be an S tier, Tyranitar would be an S tier. Like, I really didn't even consider a lot of the mega evolutions that some of these have. Like Salamence would also be an S tier as well. And a lot of these we don't know too much about. I think this would be an A tier, and this would probably be in B tier, and Goodra and Hisuian Goodra would probably stay the same. And this would probably be in the A tier as well, like once it comes out. Yeah, this is kind of how it would look with Pokemon Go specifically, but I really don't know. I feel like the tier list that I had earlier is a little bit more accurate to all Pokemon, like the entire Pokemon franchise, in my opinion. I could be completely off base here, but I am kind of biased towards some pseudo-legendaries over others, like throughout the entirety of my Pokemon fandom. But yeah, this is definitely going to look different for everyone. But at least from a gameplay point of view in Pokemon Go, this is how I would kind of see it. It's probably going to be very different once some of these Pokemon eventually get released. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see in that regard. But yeah, anyway, this was my tier list for all of the pseudo-legendaries. Now, I would love to know your thoughts regarding this tier list down below. If you were to make a tier list for all of the pseudo-legendaries in Pokemon Go, or Pokemon in general, like, how would it look? I would definitely like to know. If there are a couple changes you would make, definitely say so in the comments down below, and let's have a great discussion. And there you have it. If you ended up enjoying this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. All of you make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then do consider checking me out on Patreon. And also, don't forget, you could follow me on social media as well. My handle is @Jinsula, and I'm on the following platforms that you see on the bottom of your screen. Alright, so now that I said all of that, that's going to be completely it for this video. I'm Jinsula, be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.